Can somebody say something so I can see if my headset's working?
Hello.
You're
Can
good.
you hear us?
Yes, victory. Thank you.
Perfect. I'm looking at standing desks. Do either of you have recommendations?
I have heard good things about modding the IKEA standing desk. I'm attempting to convince my partner to do one of the mods for me with it.
Nice.
I have an autonomous one that seems to work just fine. No real complaints. Has 4 different memory settings.
I do believe that is 4 times the price of the IKEA one.
Probably.
The autonomous one I think is $250 is what it looks like on their website. I was looking at the Jarvis one and it's already like 700, which seems a little steep to me.
Yeah, and there's a Veridesk one that's also a pretty steep one. But yeah, standing desks for the win.
Yeah, it's been on my to-do list to pick one up. Just haven't gotten around to it yet.
Hello. Something's wrong with my video. One second. Here we go. Hey, everybody. Philippe, sorry I missed you. Did you have fun?
Sorry?
I said, I'm sorry I missed you. Did you have fun? You were in San Francisco, right?
I'm the one who is sorry, believe me. When I saw your messages, so for the story, I was supposed to meet with Kenny and Sid on Friday. And I don't know, I got messed up with my calendar. I thought it was at 6 p.m. and it was actually 3 p.m. And at 3 p.m. I was in the middle of an island, so that was kind of hard. Hi, Mark.
Hey there. Sorry, I'm a little late joining on here. We have a lot of folks in this call. This is awesome. And really scary for me, but there are folks that I do not recognize, which is awesome too. All right, cool.
Should we do intros?
It's not a bad idea.
I mean, I think everybody on the call knows everybody, and you, maybe you could just like point at, hey, I don't know you. Tell me what
That's fair enough. Well, I know I've certainly heard Sam's name. I don't know if I've ever met you. Maybe I haven't. And then
Well, good to meet you today then.
nice to meet you. And then Andy. I don't know if I've met you.
Yeah, why don't we just all go around? So, Nicole.
Yeah,
start.
sure.
All right, I'm starting. I'm currently PM for SCA. Yay!
I'm going to pass it off to somebody.
All right, let's go to Sam. You're next in my list.
All right. Sam Kerr. Hey, everyone. Principal Product Manager for Defend. Also doing SaaS, STAST, and some other things in the secure stage as well. Olivier?
Engineering Manager for Composition Analysis. And Kenny?
Director of Product Management for Ops, Secure, and Defend. Philippe.
Distinguished Engineer for Secure. I think we've met already.
Your name sounds familiar, at least, yeah.
Kyle, you're next.
Hey, I'm a senior product designer on the secure team.
Pass it off to somebody. Thomas, maybe?
Pass it off to Andy.
Oh.
Yep. Product designer, secure, focused on security testing, dynamic, static analysis. On to Valerie, the UX team.
Hey, my video's not working, but I'm a UX manager for Secure and Defend. and then also CI/CD for right now, but hopefully that'll get transitioned off.
I'll go. Product marketing manager for Secure and Defend.
I'll jump in as well here. Director for Secure and interim for Defend. And then I think, Thomas, you're up.
Yeah, I'll close this out. So Thomas Woodham, engineering manager for Static Analysis Group. Don't see Seth here. He's got dynamic. We just split from static and dynamic analysis group to static analysis and dynamic analysis separate groups. And I'm also interim engineering manager for Defend.
Yeah, and the last engineering manager, there's now 3 engineering managers for Secure. The last one is Seth. I don't think he joined when we created the proposed invite list for this, so I just pinged him on Slack. We'll see if he can join.
Cool. Well, thank you, everyone. And just to introduce myself, I'm Mark Ponzak, VP Product Strategy. It's actually really good to hear introductions because even folks that I do know, your titles have changed because your areas and groups have changed. And so it's actually really good to know what you're focusing on now. It used to be that everybody just did secure, and now it's more specific. So right before this call, I added a doc for the agenda. Apologize for not getting it earlier. It's literally a copy and paste from previous sessions that I had done, but removing the stuff. So the first topic on there is just to make sure we have representation from product development, design, and PMM. And as we went around, it was obvious that we did. So that's really good. We've got the full coverage here. And then one quick thing on just level setting is so we make sure we use the right words. We have standardized on calling, the plan is a 1-year horizon, and then a strategy is the 3-year horizon, and then vision is a 10-year horizon. In addition to that, there's also like a roadmap, which might go out to 3 months, and then there's milestones and things like that. But those are some of the key words. So when we talk about strategy and vision, at least today, it's not sort of the English version of the word strategy. It's specifically meant to be like the 3-year kind of, strategy. I can't define it without using the same word, but it's the, what are we intending to cover? What's the picture we're painting of 3 years from now? And that's what we're calling a strategy. Now, technically speaking, yeah, even at a 1 month, you could still have strategy and vision and everything else, but that's how we're using those terms. And then also just to set up like ahead of time, what we're trying to do, and then what do we, hope to accomplish. Usually with these, as a result of these, I would expect some update to the strategy documents. Usually there's the category pages, although in this case, there's multiple product categories that make up what I'm calling application security testing. We should probably spend some time defining what that actually is, make sure we're talking about the same thing. But just to be clear, this conversation is aimed at sort of like the industry category, not our product category. It's what would the analysts call application security testing. And so that reflects, static and dynamic, and probably all of SCA and maybe some other things, but we can spend some time defining what that is. So anyway, so updating the individual categories, but then also updating the stage strategy page as a whole. There may be other artifacts too. I'm not sure. We should talk about that. This is not dev, but there's a secure plan that is going to be shared. Well, I guess it's a strategy and plan. It's not just plan anymore, but it's that stage is going to be shared to the e-group, I think, at some point in a couple of weeks or something like that. So hopefully that will be impacted by this. But the other thing is that we're going to do a bunch of brainstorming, and I really want to make sure we're not sort of, getting into an echo chamber and just feeding off our own ideas and then like not, including, say, the customer. So I would just put forth that it's really important to go out and validate whatever we decide here, to go validate that with customers and make sure that it's, it resonates with them. In fact, actually, one of the things that's, I think it turned into an OKR is that I want to do a blog post about the strategy after all this is done, maybe a couple of iterations. I'm not sure how far we'll get. And then literally have a survey on that blog post that has people tell us how well it resonates with them. And our goal, I think, is like we want 100 people to say, yes, if you offered this, I would, use your product and switch away from whatever I had. And that's the, if we execute on this, does this resonate?
Literally
And then,
100 or number to be determined by?
No, literally 100. That's in the OKR. We were doing this kind of a little fast and loose, but we basically said, we don't necessarily want like a percentage. It's not an NPS. I don't know how strongly we feel in this, but Sid made a really good point about like, we don't necessarily care that everybody buys into this vision, but if we have 100 people that buy into this vision, that shows, some significant amount of folks that would adopt this. And so a reasonable amount of interest is what we're going for. Obviously, if the NPS is horribly low or whatever the equivalent of NPS would be on something like this, but if most people think it sucks, but we just happen to have 100,000 viewers and 100 people liked it, that would be kind of wrong. But the point is, we're looking for a bunch of people, 100, to say yes, this would be awesome. This is what I want. Happy to have a discussion about the OKR, but that's a separate topic. Anyway, the other thing is that it's become obvious, I think, with most of the other reviews like this, that one iteration isn't really enough. It's a great starting point, but probably then we'll have to write up all the conversations and then iterate again. So we'll see if there's more further iterations necessary. So the next big item, and actually I'll just read through the rest of the agenda item quickly. We're done with the introduction, but first step is to review the existing documented strategy. So we've got a page there. If you've got other pages, that's great too. I know there are some other categories and maybe the details different, but we'll start with that page. But then John Jeremiah had said the next thing is actually to talk about why. It's not just like what are we doing, but like, why are we doing this? Why do customers care? Maybe even do sort of the 5 whys kind of analysis to find out like, what are we really trying to solve? Which was really useful for the other one. So we'll do it here again. And then the bulk of the time I want to spend doing divergent thinking, just kind of like, brainstorming, but basically not being limited by where we're at today or how much effort we think it's going to take or anything like that. But like, what could we do in this space? What problems can we solve, etc. And then bring that down with convergent thinking about like, okay, well, what's actually really important to do right now? How do we turn this into an articulated 3-year strategy? And then also, how do we turn that into a 1-year plan? Because the sequencing does matter sometimes. Well, it always matters. But anyway, so that's it at a high level. So let's dive in. Hopefully, most of you.
I have a question, Mark.
Sure.
In the agenda and in the invitation, there is an AST. Are we going to focus on that, or is AST stands for something I'm not aware of? For me, AST is related to code, abstract syntax tree.
Not that thing, no.
Okay.
Application security testing, AppSec, depending.
Thank you.
So maybe that's actually the first thing worth talking about before we even jump into, because I pointed to the secure vision as the one artifact, but the reality is that secure covers more than what I think I would count as application security testing. And I could be totally wrong, and Cindy, correct me if I'm wrong, but we've had this for 9 months or so on our vision. But I think of application security testing as being one complete area that as a customer and as an analyst that I'm looking to solve. And it might be multiple products that I need to solve that, but I need to, test my application security as opposed to, all the stuff that's in defend, like, make sure that it's secure at runtime, or even things like license compliance. I know it gets a little bit convoluted because that's part of SCA a lot of times, but I don't think of license compliance as part of application security. I think of that as completely different stuff. So I'm looking at a subset of what's on the secure stage. But if I look at, SAST, DAST, security detection, AST, fuzzing, dependency scanning, container scanning, well, and then vulnerability database. So basically everything except license compliance. Does that sound about right?
It does, but I do get a little cautious about, like Forrester calls SCA, in their SCA definition includes license compliance. So I could go
I
either
totally,
way.
yeah, and I don't know how to rectify that. I totally get that SCA has a defined term, but again, since we're talking about something that's more than SCA anyway, I'm okay. If we really want to include it, like, that's fine. If you want to include licenses in there, I'm
My
okay with
only
it.
concern is if you don't include it, where does it fall to? I want to make sure it doesn't fall off the radar.
Right, and so that's a really, really good point here. To be clear, like, this isn't about saying Secure shouldn't do it. Secure could have 20 other categories if we allowed that, and that'd be totally fine. What I want to get at here is that I want to come up with a strategy that gets us to being a product leader and eventually a market leader in application security testing. And so when a customer needs to test their application, like, they go to us because we're at the top.
Then I would include it because that's the point in the workflow when you do it, is along with all of this other security testing.
Right.
And I'll just say, like, I get the desire to be targeted at a specific pain point, but in terms of structures we have for communicating that vision, we don't have one in this interim between that crosses all groups, but like excludes one category. So just saying the secure vision is the thing that we're going to update as the thing that's going to project our vision for AST plus license compliance will make this process easier.
Yep, that's fine. So let's do it just because it's easier. That's fine. So it's all the secure vision then. Let's go with that. In other topics like this, it's not so clean. Anyway. All right. So if somebody could take 3 to 5 minutes, maybe, and maybe paint sort of the picture of what's currently written, what we've got written down. And again, not this whole document, but like, just paint me a picture of what secure looks like in 3 years, according to our currently written down stuff.
Nicole, Sam, you want to take first shot? I know there's been some updates to this document recently, so.
I mean, I can start and then we can iterate from there. So 3 years from now, I think that we will have a whole bunch of mechanisms in place, not just to find vulnerabilities, but we'll be able to determine which ones actually matter. And that could be a combination of weeding out false positives and also determining within like your risk profile that you've set, does this particularly matter for this project or this group? And then you will be able to concentrate your man hours and actions against those highest priority items. And we'll be proactively informing the correct people about only those high priority items. And when we're informing, we're also educating. So either we have contributed back into the community to help explain, here's what a cross-site scripting is, and this is generally how you fix it. Or for some really common things that we see, we have offered auto remediation. So if we know that you don't like to have a dependency very far out of date, or we know that whenever there is a dependency of yours that a CVE was found, we tell you, by the way, here's an MR, and we found like there's 4 parts of your code that broke when we ran it. So once you fix that, we can get that out. Or you have a SQL injection here, and we know that by hashing this, you're going to eliminate that. So why don't you hash this input? And then on the input side, you're going to have to dehash it to interpret it. So we're explaining to people what they need to do to fix it, and we're helping them proactively be informed and repaired. I don't know if that was 3 minutes, but that's where I see it getting, is relevant, save you time, education, and concentration of human effort.
Yeah, I'll add on to that a little bit. Where I'd like to see GitLab in 3 years with secure staging specifically is that everyone in the industry who's making software has begun to think about security as a first-class thing as part of their project, their applications. It's not we'll get to it when we can. I think in 3 years, the market will move where that's a priority for everyone. And they'll think of the various capabilities that GitLab has as essential and critical to have. So SAST, DAST, container scanning, all the different offerings will be commonly known as these are the things that you have to consider your application and your development processes secure. And that GitLab will be considered the leader in the space of you care about security, GitLab provides all of the capabilities you need in a single place in addition to all the other DevOps functionality we provide. And so we'll start to see conversations shifting away from not only do I need security at all, but do I really even need point solutions or single purpose vendors, and more of how does your platform that you're using for development provide security out of the box like GitLab does. That's where I see us in 3 years.
Awesome. Thank you for that.
Hey, Mark, just one point. I think I see you taking notes in a different section than Cindy and others were taking notes, just so you know.
Oh,
I started a new,
weird.
what does it look like in 3 years question. Sorry.
Oh, okay.
I screwed up your ordering.
That's all right.
Double notes.
Okay. That's fair.
I'd like to add a couple things to that, or maybe emphasize a couple points. Nicole mentioned risk, and I think that's a really important element so that people can assess not only that there's a vulnerability, but the risk of that vulnerability being exploited, and that we need to be able to automate customers' policies, whatever they are, even if we disagree with them. If whatever risk acceptance they're comfortable with is going to determine their policies, and we should automate their policies and not presume that we know better what they should care about. And then we need to consider how much appetite we have to consume other people's scanning input. I don't know what the answer is for that, but I just throw that on the table to make sure we don't lose sight of it.
Yeah, let's table that for now. I know that's a big topic for you. So I really liked the, Sam's comment, first class, removing the point solutions, being able to deliver sort of everything you need from, security. There's a little bit of looseness in that that I would love to resolve, because sort of, everything you need from security is a really, really big ask. We're not going to make everything 100% secure. There's got to be some scope to that. How do we define that scope? And right now, I think it's easy because we can just say, well, it's SaaS, DAST, et cetera, and then we'll be great in that. But one of the really important things I think I'd like to figure out is there some part of scope that we haven't considered? Like SAST and DAST are just particular tools, but the ultimate goal is to just make sure that the code has no vulnerabilities. But are there other ways to make sure the codes have no vulnerabilities, that kind of thing?
Actually, that's an excellent point, because one of the things that I don't think we've put on here, not even sure if it fits in secure, but is only pulling in things like the dependencies that are known to be free of vulnerabilities. We've heard that with some customers and prospects that's what they'd like to have. Like I said, maybe that fits in Create. I don't know where it fits in GitLab, but that's something from a security vision that I think we need to include.
Yeah, it's interesting. There is this like other parts of other stages also have security related functionality. So Cindy, what you're talking about, there's an active proposal to add in package a new category called dependency firewall or something like that, to basically protect against bringing in known vulnerable dependencies that does fall outside of secure. So I agree, there are like point things that go at this same problem and question that span stages, I think.
Well, and so to that point, we need to decide, is this vision internally focused or externally focused? If it's externally focused, customers and prospects care about all of those things, whether they're in our secure stage or not.
Even if it's internally focused, my goal is that we should be baking security into, I don't want secure stage to stay within its own little bubble. I want us to partner and work with every single piece of the DevOps cycle, because one customer even brought up, is there a way during planning stages we can make sure that testing quality, code quality, vulnerability, avoidance is included as part of planning? Can we, during actual development, I think I have an epic somewhere for can we incorporate into the web IDE, like warning, we're gonna flag that dependency, it's got vulns. So like, can we help you before you even commit that MR? During the MR, during your testing, look for dynamic things. During your deployment, security in depth. Secure should be in depth, not just secure state, no matter how many people we have to partner.
So I think this is already.
I actually want to talk about one point we said earlier about zero vulnerabilities, and I'll actually offer a slight disagreement with that. And I know that's going to be controversial, but I want to talk about it. Our goal is not necessarily that we get our customers and users to zero vulnerabilities. Our goal is to get them to as many vulnerabilities as they are comfortable with based on their tolerance for risk in their business. If our customers only have the option between 3 open source packages, each which has 1, 2, or 3 dozen vulnerabilities, or build it themselves, they're actually going to be probably better off choosing the one with a dozen vulnerabilities, because the cost to go to zero is diminishing returns. It's less business value for them to actually reduce that risk than to accept it and deliver customer value of their own, and worrying about that risk as part of doing business.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Target isn't zero, just like sort of quality and time and all these other kinds of things. They're all trade-offs. It's a question of what are you willing to do, and zero isn't the goal. Zero exploits might be the goal to some extent, depending on what your scenario is. If you're a bank and things like that, zero exploits. But there's also multiple ways you can solve that too. You can have a vulnerability and then throw a firewall around it, and overall you're safer, etc.
Or you don't care if your web server is compromised because there is no PII data on there, and there is the sensitive data.
Exactly. So going back to rewinding just a second, though, it seems like there's a common pattern actually that's emerging from a lot of these, where if we define the category based on where the industry is today, and say we want to be a product leader in that category, you come up with a certain feature set that the customers expect. But we then have an opportunity to go beyond that and either shift left more, or have it permeate more of the DevOps lifecycle or something like that, moving into the creation with the web IDE, things like that, where we are uniquely suited to solving those problems. And in fact, we might be the only ones that can actually pull that stuff off. And there's a lot of value in it. And I think it's really important to have both of those things discussed. What I'm going to propose, though, is we need to be a product leader in what a customer expects. And then we also need to go beyond that and make it even better, bonus, if you will, but maybe it'll become required at some point, to be like, oh, but we need this stuff in, whatever, we need all this cross-stage stuff, and that's the only things that, we are the only ones that can provide that. And but you can't just focus on that exclusively. Like if we go spread really thin, make all these really interesting things where we tackle, but like the actual SAST scanning just isn't good enough, well then like you're not going to get those customers, because you need you need to meet customers' expectations. But by conversely, if we just define the market the way that everybody expects today, then we'll miss out on the opportunity. So I think it is really crucial for us to, at the stage and category level, always be looking at what can we uniquely do because we have the entire DevOps lifecycle. And if you want to factor that into this strategy, I think that totally makes sense, especially at the secure level. It totally makes sense. I just want to make sure that we absolutely also have, like in the end, when Forrester, Gartner, et cetera, make their magic quadrants and Forrester waves for application security testing, assuming that's what they call it, that we're in the top right and we've actually satisfied their expectations.
Yeah, and maybe one concrete way to think about that is like we can think expansively about all the ways we could be differentiated in the unique things we do, but we focus on the 1 or 2 most powerful ways of doing that, and like allocate some bandwidth of our effort towards ensuring that differentiation while also increasing maturity in the categories that we know are important as kind of like the baseline.
Right, and it may also be a sequencing thing. You could choose to do the baseline first and then do the other things. Although, as an example, when we did monitoring, when we first introduced monitoring a year and a half ago or something like that, we did a couple of months of baseline, metrics and charts, and then said, great, now let's put that chart in the merge request, because I want to be able to see what the impact of my merge request is on like a review app, or even after post merge, I want to see it before and after. And it was really important to do the unique thing pretty early on. Not the first thing, but 3 months in. In reality though, looking back, hindsight, monitoring still has a long ways to go before it's actually going to displace a lot of competitors. And we can't sort of displace competitors by just offering these other interesting things. We have to offer the core. So there's got to be a balance. I love that we're thinking about, what can we uniquely do? We also need to make sure that our core stuff works beautifully.
I think for the application security testing pieces, since we rely so heavily on open source, the thing we'll need to ensure is that the actual vendors who are commercially selling the same technology as compared to the open source projects, that we don't see them diverging in quality too much to the point where the open source's version of that technology isn't sufficient for what's actually going to be, required. I think that's probably the biggest risk with the strategy we have of, using open source technology. If those projects do become dead or start falling behind for whatever reason, that's going to be the thing, Mark, to your point about core, where we're going to have to make investments to keep that technology up to date with the other commercial vendors.
Absolutely. And I think that's really worth talking about, because that's something that I think we've struggled with quite a bit. And you could say, oh, this open source thing is, clearly going to be a dead end because proprietary stuff's going to win. So therefore we should partner with some proprietary, et cetera. So the other aspect here is to make sure that we are staying true to our philosophies and our ambition, and saying, okay, well, what do we do with that information? Can we contribute to the open source and make it as good as the proprietary things? Do we have to start over for some reason? Hopefully not, but we prefer to, invest in the open source. In fact, I think that's written down as a philosophy somewhere. But, how do we make sure that we either have the open source be good enough to meet the actual customer needs, and because sometimes people add proprietary stuff that isn't actually necessary, but, they're trying to differentiate. But, to the extent that that is true, that they need those things, how do we make sure we compete? And that we can certainly go and build that ourselves, build a competitive thing.
I know we don't want to be negative, but I think we should be concentrating on the 80-20. I don't think we are going to be the base choice for everyone. I think we need to concentrate on, a certain set of users and a certain set of technologies, and make sure that I'd love to see us be able to hire some more people and actually be more regularly contributing back and be a very solid choice for a very specific set of technologies and audience. But I'm not sure that we'll be able to be expansive enough to cover 90% of the market. I'd rather have a specific target and make them the happy people who love what we do and are happy to use us.
So here's, I think, where the 3-year versus 1-year thing kind of kicks in a bit. I would love to say that in 3 years, we have a competitive product that, even as a point solution, is certainly up in the top right. And in the 1-year time frame, though, we need to say, well, let's focus on, certainly the 80-20. I mean, 80-20 applies as a good rule anyway, right? If you can get 80% of the benefit with 20% of the effort, absolutely go ahead and do that. Or even if it's, well, we have to actually deliver 80% of the effort, but let's not bother doing the next 20 because that's not as necessary. Totally all fine with that. What I want to make sure, though, is that we do not have a strategy as a company that we are aiming lower just because we are a complete DevOps platform. Our goal is not to have 10 stages that are all mediocre, but because you like them so much put together, you're willing to do it because it's cheaper or something like that. That's not the goal. Our goal is actually to have every one of those stages be market leaders, or at least product leaders. And the way I'm differentiating there is whether, because product leader means the product capabilities are there to be leaders. Market leaders mean you're actually getting the sales to show your market leadership. I'm okay with us not necessarily being market leaders because of, if you're on some competitive SCM, you might choose never to use us, and that's okay. But if you do use us for SCM, then you should definitely be looking at us for your AST. I would like to think of that as being product leadership that will eventually lead to market leadership. But our goal is that all 10 of these are top tier stages, and that each of our categories at some point are top tier categories. So I want to make sure that we are setting our ambition level at the right place and not saying, oh, well, we can never actually compete with XYZ, so therefore let's just aim for something and then leave it there. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I do think that's an important thing to keep in mind, especially as product managers, because we tend to think in like, what am I going to prioritize next mode? But we need to make sure we're always painting the long-term vision that we're an incredibly ambitious company. If you looked at the company like 5 years ago and said you're going to be a Forrester Wave leader in CI, people would have laughed at you, but here we are. So we should have the same ambition for AST for sure.
Right, and it's really important to sort of wrap your head around, because I know it's hard. Everybody doesn't believe we can do it, and that's one of the biggest things that people see, but our proof point is that we did that with CI, and our goal is to do that again with all the rest of these. And that's why specifically these 4 that I've called out, project management, CDRA, AST, and VSM, these are the next 4 that I think are really crucial for us to be in that top right quadrant of, the next wave or whatever. So I'd like to be there with application security testing, whether that's, I don't know if we're going to get there in the next year, but I would actually love a plan that gets us there in the next year. But even if not, at least by the time, 3 years are up, that, yeah, we have done that.
And can I ask a potential shift question here?
Yeah.
Knowing that we don't want to lower our ambition, but the competitor landscape in application security testing is broad. Can we articulate who we want to compete well against now, in 1 year, in 3 years, and then in 5 years?
I'd say the answer is yes.
Good idea.
Yeah, I don't think that's divergent at all. I think that is a good way to summarize our intent at those, is to think about specific competitors that we would say we would compete well against. I think it's a great way to think about it. I don't know if I have an answer off the top of my head, but.
Well, I think Microsoft has to be on there, even though they're not a traditional security vendor.
At which mark? At the 1 year, 3 year, 5 year mark? I think what Thomas is suggesting is that by saying, hey, in 1 year we want to be competitive with X, that at least gives us a guide stone. And then knowing that in 5 years we want to be competitive with, I don't know, Microsoft maybe is the 5 year mark. Who knows?
Well, I don't know. I think I would flip that a little bit the other direction. I think Microsoft is the near-term competitor. And the fact that we have security in there, they are just partnering, is an advantage for us, but it's a little bitty advantage, and it's not going to stick around if we don't stay on top of it. So I would say Microsoft is the short-term competitor. Longer term, we could say Fortify, Veracode, Synopsys. The only thing is, if they don't change their strategy, I think they're going to become less relevant in 3 to 5 years. So it's a little bit, I think that 3 to 5 year mark is, we have to make sure we're thinking strategically and not just tactically comparing ourselves capability by capability to who is currently the market leader.
I think we can absolutely identify, competitors, and we have in this doc, but I don't know if I buy the premise of like, oh, well, in 1 year we're going to go compete with these, but in 3 years we're going to compete with these. If the space is the same, unless you're saying that, well, some of these competitors aren't, are easier to compete with because they're not as good, well, then let's not even aim for them in the first place. I don't know. It's a little bit weird to say that we're like, some of these are going to be competitors for 1 year, or not for 1 year, but they are going to be in 3 years. I'd have a hard time differentiating between that.
Yeah, and I guess I was thinking it's helpful to kind of know, it's a helpful mechanism for prioritization, right? if I could say, well, yeah, I know that we just said in 3 years' time, we want to be the leader across the whole market, but we might have a 1-year plan that is not that, right? And so
the trick there is just like, is it based on competitor lines or is it based on something else? Is it based on like, well, we want to be a market leader in SAST but not dependency scanning, which would be a weird statement. But if we did, like, okay, then we focus on that. Like if there's clearly some categories that matter more than others, then let's prioritize those. And maybe then that happens to correlate with other competitors.
And you bring up a really good point there, because I've mentioned before, I think that SAST is pretty commoditized. I don't know that it would do us as much good to be like the best SAST scanning product if we don't also have the best container scanning and dependency scanning. Where the market's going, in my mind, dependency scanning and container scanning are more important to differentiate ourselves and be really super good at, because that's a part of the market that's not already well entrenched. There's not already somebody that has, huge market share there. So, and that's where the people are going when you look at serverless and cloud native, those things become much more important. So if we had to prioritize which things we want to be really good at, I'd make sure that we're super stellar in dependency and containers.
Yeah, so I wouldn't disagree. I think that's great. We are getting a little out of order, which is totally fine because it's part of the process here. But this section right now is supposed to just be covering what was already written down, and then we're supposed to kind of go jump up a level to why. We kind of skipped over that, but maybe it's worth like writing this stuff down. Like, what is the scope that we're really talking about here? What are customers really trying to achieve? What problems are then we trying to solve? And, sort of do the 5 whys. Somebody want to take a stab at saying like, what is the purpose of our secure stage?
Well, sure, I'll take a stab at it. So in terms of overarching purpose of the secure stage, it's to prevent software vulnerabilities that are potentially exploitable from reaching releases or production code by doing pre-checks, doing testing beforehand to mitigate them, so that ultimately your business isn't exposed to some risk where there's a data breach or a hack, and you have a financial penalty or a user data penalty as a result of those breaches or vulnerabilities not being caught in testing.
That's actually pretty good definition.
This is one side of the coin. The other one is to make you aware about the current state. So because you were defining what we can avoid, we can prevent the implication to be vulnerable with, but we also should show the current state of the vulnerabilities.
And then go farther and say, really, you should be able to audit and prove that you have, done sufficient diligence or something along those lines. But a couple of important things that you kind of talked out, like there's lots of ways you can reduce your business risk. This is one specific way where the goal is still to reduce your business risk, but, preventing vulnerabilities reaching production or exploitable vulnerabilities, so those are actually some key words in there that I think are pretty important.
Do we really want to use prevent though? Because that almost implies 100%.
Maybe reduce.
Yeah.
Well, now this gets back to a subtlety of it. While the goal might be to just reduce, maybe if you really want to do that, then I think you probably need the flip side and say something like, balancing that with velocity and other kinds of stuff. But because if we just talk about like, what is the goal? Yeah, the customer's goal is to prevent. The customer's goal is to not have any vulnerabilities. The trick is, of course, that almost guaranteed has a higher cost than they're willing to pay. And so then it's, making it meet their risk profile. There's probably some better way to wordsmith that to make it more accurate. Because if you just say reduce, it's not reduce in an absolute sense. Like, oh, you reduced by 10%, therefore you succeeded. It's like, no, you went as far as you possibly could while making us move even faster. And, you shifted left as much as you could.
Within
blah, blah,
your
blah.
risk profile.
Right, exactly. Within your risk profile.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the thing I would add is some of this is just an education or information for the customer. So whether they do anything or not, it's making them aware of the risk and then giving them the ability to make the decisions as to how they want to handle it.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
I mean, banking's a great example in this space with all the anti-fraud and fraud detection controls they have in place. They don't shoot for anywhere near zero. They put as part of their budget, we're going to lose $10 million a year, a month, or whatever, to fraudulent transactions, and then they just budget that in and pass it on to their customers and their clients as fees, right? In their case, their goal is to reduce that risk level to 10 million a month or a year or whatever it is. So I think Cindy's point about risk tolerance is the key there. Reduce it to be in line with your risk tolerance for your business. So
then there's another interesting dimension there, which is like if you look at any sort of trade-off of, whatever, the classic project management sort of time, quality, cost thing. And you can be like, oh, well, this is a zero-sum game. I need to trade off everything. But you could also be like, well, what can we do to make that whole triangle bigger or smaller, depending what direction you're going? And so there's something to be said for, like, let's say there's a cost to running scannings and wasting time evaluating all these things. But to, earlier point Nicole talked about of like, well, we want to make sure that we give you fewer false negatives, fewer false positives, fewer false anythings. We want to make your whole system more efficient. We can actually maybe help shift your risk profile so that you can actually aim for like even lower risk with constant cost. Like that, as a customer, that's probably really what I'm paying for. That's the differentiator. Like if as a company, all you do is give me a slider, it's like, great. But if you actually change the size of the damn, pie chart or whatever, like you pay for that. Is there something to that as our goal?
I mean, I think there should be. That's the premise of, it's the premise of the market we're in, is that we're a software creation efficiency tool. And so we should be able to say, with you gave me a risk profile in your current thing without our tool, that meant you've accepted all of these externalities, whether that's cost or slowness or whatever. And with GitLab, you have to accept less of those. But I think it's still important to speak honestly about there being a trade-off between risk and security, regardless of what the size of the envelope. Like, whenever you're talking about security, you should always be using that in the frame of how much risk you're willing to encounter. Whether or not we dramatically improve that calculation for you or not, it still needs to be part of the discussion.
Yeah, that makes sense. I don't know exactly how to articulate that yet, but I think there's something there that we want to make your system more efficient in some way so that you can, catch more with less.
Well,
I think
so somehow it gets into the fact that when you are finding something before it goes to production earlier on, like if we were able to shift it all the way into planning somehow, if you can architect better from the start, then you won't have rework or you won't have to add mitigation steps. So we want to make it so that you can go faster because you're not having to do rework, that you can go faster because you're not having to fix as many bugs that have hit production. The whole goal is faster and more secure. So yeah, however we phrase that.
Well, I do think like we do this generally. Like it's hard to describe what's the benefit of GitLab as a whole, but we always use these great customer examples of like increasing cycle time or other things like that. Like I think we can, if you shift the mental model to not like how do I describe it in words, but what would like the customer case study be that would help us validate that? I think we can and should be able to come up with a bunch of those.
I think you nailed it with that, Kenny and Nico. Do you know why people are buying Ultimate today? There are only two reasons. The first one is they want to get started with security. They don't know how to do that. So they're very glad to have this open source bundle that we have today, and they can get started very easily. And they can do a lot of things like SaaS, DAST, and container scanning at once. And the second part is they already have a security team. They already have some tools. So why would they spend more money in a security tool? It's not another security tool. GitLab is the glue between all of this. It's the only way to bring security in front of the developers, and they can do that with the other tools. They can do that with Synopsys or Veracode or whatever. Veracode, checkmarks, and all the others, they are for security people, whereas GitLab is seen as something that will bring security to the developers, that will make the developers security aware. They will make the whole process more efficient, because we are shifting left with that. And even if these companies are telling you we are shifting left as well, they can't do that because we are the only one being in the middle of the process. The merge request, again, I guess I told you that enough, but it's becoming a dashboard, and we are the only ones being able to do that. So that's why they love the idea of GitLab, of having a single UI, a single application, and have security completely built in wherever the results are coming from. All these vendors are data in the end. The data could come from the tools that we are providing or any of the vendors out there. It doesn't matter. I just don't care about that. If you're just getting started with security, it's not worth investing in checkmarks or Veracode. Just use the bundle. It's going to provide almost the same results. You don't need the top-notch results because you won't have time to deal with all the results anyway. So it's good enough, and that's probably why we should take this from a different angle. Not sure that we should be the best in breed in SAST or dependency scanning or container scanning. And I think we should be best in breed with what we're doing with these results.
Well, I agree with you in the sense that the secret sauce that we bring is that we are showing the results at code commit. I mean, that is the key benefit. And I agree with you that that's my whole point about pulling in other people's scanning results. You can do that, and you're not commoditizing yourself, because our secret sauce is that it's where we sit in the workflow. But I do think at the same time, you have to pick a couple of places to be the best at, or you're not going to appease some of the influencers and decision makers, like security people, even though our primary.
But even.
Go ahead.
No, sorry, go on.
Well, I mean, I agree with Philippe. I just think that we do have to also pick a couple areas to excel at.
So purely from a sales motion perspective, if we can displace some number of vendors, and if we can tell you your total cost of ownership, or the equivalent term for software development, your total cost of development goes down by X $1,000 a year, then because you have, you can turn off 3 other vendors, that is a much easier sell than, oh no, you need to keep those vendors, but we're going to take their information and we're going to show it to you earlier, which will improve your efficiency and effectiveness. And then we have to try to somehow do math on the ROI there. It becomes a much more difficult sell. So I would like to say, if nothing else, that our goal is absolutely to displace some number of vendors. Now, maybe we don't need to displace all of them. And I totally am on board with, like, well, look, even if, you choose us, you still may have 1 or 2 point solutions you need to bring in, but at least you don't have 5 or 6. And so that's a benefit. But we absolutely need to displace some vendors to make this a reasonable sell.
Yeah, I mean, I think that goes back to the earlier discussion of, like, there are some of these things that where we're the better glue and where we can and should be differentiated. Philippe is going out that, like, having stuff at and Cindy having stuff at the commit level is one of those places, but we still have to, if we want to be top right in that Gartner Magic Quadrant, like, we still have to have the baseline tools be mature enough. And
I almost feel like it would be interesting to figure out where the biggest bang for your buck is from a tools perspective. And I am completely making this up, so I would love to maybe verify this in some way. But let's say AST is the biggest bang for your buck, followed by dependency, updating, and scanning. If those 2 are the things that can make the most significant difference in lowering your risk profile? What if those two were the ones that we wanted to be standalone, amazing, and everything else we were like, we will be good at?
Well, and that's where I come back to dependency scanning and container scanning. I think those are the ones, but.
And you also have to consider the cost to reach that maturity, because if you're thinking about SaaS, you have to dig into each specific languages, which means if you want to target a lot of customers, you need to be an expert in several languages, which is super costly. Whereas,
which is why I'm saying, yeah, we need to figure out what the ones that make the difference are, and how do we get there?
Yeah, and it's so if I can put it down to what is the kind of the delta between the quality of the open source projects versus commercial projects. Again, if we can get 80% of the value from an open source project, when we go up against a point solution in a deal, the landmine they're going to plant against us is, hey, you know, our security is 10 security points better than the open source thing. But we're going to be able to lean back on, yes, but we have SaaS, DAST, container scanning. You know, we have all of these other capabilities that just emphasizing the 100% of a single capability isn't worth giving up all of these other capabilities as well. Now, I think that really comes down to what the difference between the open source versus a commercial solution is.
So I think there's a bunch of complex calculus we can do here, from a combination of our effort and what's existing and leverage of open source, and you know what's actually going to make an impact and everything else. But all that affects sort of the 1 year plan. And I do still believe, and I want to assert, that in 3 years, our strategy is to have a best of breed in every one of those things. And that I totally get that we could choose dependency scanning as the first one or something else. And maybe it's even we choose something and then we look at the open source and then turns out the open source isn't good enough or whatever. Like we may then change, like coming up with how we actually execute, totally valid conversation. But 3 years, I think it's probably kind of crucial that we have an option for all of those things. I also want to go back to something Philippe said. So he had talked about that there's the people who are just getting started. And yeah, the fact that we make it super easy to get started means that they've got instant value. They had 0 security testing before, and now they have some security testing. And so that's an infinite improvement. And I totally get that. There's an interesting flip side though of if you look at companies that have security testing, and they might be like through tools, it might be through audits, it might be the massive manual process, it might be through bug bounty programs or something like that. It could be lots of different things. You could argue that in some ways, actually, our job then isn't to improve their security stance at all. It's just to make it cheaper to continue their security stance. Not cheaper in terms of cost, like dollars, but cheaper in terms of like, the more you shift left, the faster you catch things, the less work it is, etc. And we're just making the whole thing more efficient. And that's a really interesting point. If you think about like, yeah, the value of secure isn't actually to make your thing any more secure. It's just to make you more efficient in being secure. I think those are kind of two extremes, obviously. And it's not exactly 100% in either one of those. But it's a really interesting viewpoint, I think.
One other point that I think we should talk through, and because it kind of affects the scope a little bit too. The fact that we do DAST at code commit is something very unique. And I've often wondered, does it negate the need to do IAST? Because IAST was created because you couldn't do DAST early. Now, the only difference between what we do and IAST is we don't instrument the app. So
it all comes down to the effectiveness. If DAST works, awesome. If it doesn't, I mean, the big concern I have, and I don't know how these tools are really used, but there's a human element, I believe, in IAST in terms of, somebody's still messing around, whereas DAST is like 100% automated. And so anytime you go 100% automated, there's a limitation of what your capabilities are. I don't know. It's really interesting though.
Well, so DAST is 100% automated, but it's basically automated pen testing, and you had to have a fully functioning app in order to do it. Well, nobody has a fully functioning app in dev except us to run the scan against. because we've got the review app. And so the fact that we're doing it as early as we are almost negates the need for IAST. You really have to think about, if I instrument the application, what do I gain from it? And maybe you think about the instrumentation differently, and maybe instrumentation just becomes a way of connecting the dots between dev and what you do in operations with Defend. Food for thought.
Yeah, and it might be like an 80-20 kind of thing, that if you do that, you cover most everything. And then maybe it's worth it, instead of trying to do IAST to do the next 20%, there's something else. Like, again, maybe, bug bounty programs catch the next 20% even more effectively.
Right.
I'm not quite sure.
And maybe you do an interface with bug bounty programs, or you have something where if HackerOne finds something, then you automatically look for where else is that used and capture it real quick, because it's going to reduce your bug bounty costs.
Right. Okay, so in the spirit of this why section, do we need to do a couple of levels deeper on the why, in terms of why do businesses want to reduce their risk, or why do they want to stop exploits from getting in production? I assume that's all fairly self-explanatory, but I suppose that's why we do the 5 whys, because sometimes surprising things come out. So I'll ask the simple question, why do people want to prevent software vulnerabilities from getting into production? And you could also think about well, if you have a really great firewall, then nothing can be exploited, which we know is not true. But, or if there's, if everything's encrypted at rest and all these other kinds of things, then maybe I don't care about exploits. But again, we know that's not true.
Well, and one answer is because they're required to.
That's a good question.
I definitely agree, because they're required to is one. I think the other one is because of their reputation. If a breach happens and they're found to have not even been trying, their reputation will be damaged.
So that's a really good little spin-off, because there's a bunch of things working with sort of financial industry and stuff where it's not that they need it to be no exploits. It's that they need it to be, they did their market, best practices. And they need to be able to prove that they did the same as every other bank, kind of thing. They don't need to do the best they can. They just need to be the same.
Mm-hmm.
And there's actually an interesting part of law there. I don't know exactly how it applies now, but where legally, as long as you can prove that you did, what you were responsible for, then you still may have damages and things, but you don't have punitive damages or whatever. And I'm just getting a little bit depth of my.
Brings up a really interesting thought in terms of benchmarking, because one of the things that Fortify does really well is they monetize the fact that their SaaS business, the Fortify On Demand, they get they see the results from all that, and so they can monetize by providing information back to their customers to say, this is the norm. Here's the kind of vulnerabilities that people are seeing, or here's whatever. So maybe we should be thinking about doing something where, for at least for the SaaS business, where we see, we could capture some things, some sort of benchmark, to your point about they just have to be as good as everybody else.
And yeah, I mean, I don't want to disclose too much, but I've heard of another company that basically made a product that did that helped banks prove that they actually helped banks all to get together and make a little consortium of, this is the risk profile we're all going to share. And it's a public, maybe not public, but it's an internally shared sort of consortium-y kind of thing. This is the profile, we're all going to follow it. You can imagine it applying to earlier your conversation about, Kenny brought it up, of the package side of being you can't you can't use a dependency that hasn't, or that has X critical vulnerabilities. But you could say well, we're going to ensure that this, dependency or proxy has a risk profile, and nobody can, make use of a tool that fails this risk profile. And because all the banks share that risk profile, they are all happier. Again, happier even than if you proved it was a better risk profile, or something like that. It's no, we have the same one. That's actually the value.
Yeah.
But going further then, the why, right? So there's the because you have to. Then there's the because it costs, right? Exploits cost, either in terms of reputation, but also in terms of actual money and damages and things like that. And then the other big one, the reason that we are really worried because we have this big bug bounty program is because it's the existential threat thing. Like, it could cost so much that your company goes under, that, you know, you disclose or whatever, you have a breach of the worst thing possible and your company doesn't survive. And there's a lot that you probably need to make sure that existential threats don't happen. AST is just a part of that, but it certainly is a part of it. It does make me wonder about, like, we've invested so much in our bug bounty program, and, you know, there's a big part of me that's like, why are bug bounty programs necessary if you've got such great, yeah, Equifax is still around, I know. But sometimes companies don't succeed and survive these things, right? But like, yeah, why do we still have a bug bounty program? Like, if AST is so great, the reality is it's just not. And maybe it's like totally unachievable that it would be great. And then there's also just like social exploits. Like, there's all sorts of things that, like, code is not the actual problem. Like, stupid people's passwords, like, that's a huge problem. And, like, that's all out of scope, but it's all part of security and existential threat things.
Yeah, and sorry, that made me think of, and maybe this is more about divergent thinking, not about a further why. But when we talk about application security, we frame it in that, I don't know what you call it, like deterministic application security. That's, we run scans and then we look at the results and we prioritize which one is the right one. But is there, maybe let me phrase it this way, is there a viable strategy for, I'm creating a software company and I'm not going to do any security testing, but I am going to have like a red team model or a bug bounty? That's all I'm going to do, nothing else. Does that work?
I think it depends on the maturity of your organization. If you're a startup with 2 people out of a garage, you don't care as much about security testing. But as you get more mature, I think that model changes dramatically.
I mean, exactly to your point, I believe there's a ton of companies actually operating exactly that way right now.
Well, no, but let me be clear. What Kenny said was not companies that don't care about security. What he was saying was, you do care about security, but your mechanism by which you exercise that is a red team. No application security testing, no DAST, no firewalls, no whatever. You just have a red team that constantly tries to exploit
I was
your
about
thing.
to say that, Mark. You nailed it. It's we should not see application security as the security of the company. It's not to secure the application. Application security is to help the security team to secure the applications. Absolutely not the same. So comparing that to a bounty program is not super fair. The bug bounty program is the last resort. It's the ultimate way to secure the product, but app security is not going to do that. It's just going to help and to make the company more efficient in that process.
But if the cost of your red team member is cheaper than the cost of implementing AppSec, like, that seems like it would be a reasonable choice. If you
right, and that's what maybe the different way to frame it, like, is could we, as a vendor in application security, get completely disrupted by some company that says, oh, all that application security testing stuff, it's hogwash. All you need to do is hire us and we'll red team your application for you constantly. Like, and we can do that cheaper than all that testing.
Yes, absolutely. Because if you have something very obvious, like a dependency that is outdated, you will pay $5K for that. And you don't want to pay $5K for the very obvious. If you have 10,000 projects, it's going to cost you a lot more than just use some tools.
Right.
We have tools.
So then maybe the hypothesis here really is that AST is actually just about sort of low-hanging fruit. It's about, hey, you can catch all these things, saving you money. It's not about 100% accuracy. Frankly, like, you're not actually trying to catch every vulnerability in your code. You're just catching, like, you know, the OWASP top 10 and all these things. But, like, you know, lots of people get exploited with things that aren't in the top 10, right? The whole point is, though, this is low-hanging, and sometimes it's super easy to be like, oh, look, you know, you've got this kind of well-known problem that should just not get to production. But it does not mean your security ends there. You still have a massive part of it. So then, like, is our goal to just be really cost effective? Is our goal to be, covering the basis? Is it to be like, you know, an 80-20 kind of rule? Again, like, yo, you spend 20% of your budget, but you cover 80%, but the rest you just can't. And there is a certain limitation to like AST, like even if you found 100% of the detectable kinds of vulnerabilities, like there's just a whole bunch of other things that aren't detectable in some way, like their design flaws or their whatever the hell, like there's stuff that goes wrong.
Reduce the low-hanging fruit, then I think your security team actually gets to look away from your software and start looking at your support team. Can they be social engineered into giving up data?
Right.
Like literally, I think the goal is to increase the cost of breach for the attackers, for any of our customers, to the point that their security team is like, I am fairly confident our AppSec is costly enough that I need to now concentrate on training internal employees about spear phishing and phishing and social engineering.
Right.
There's
That's
another
how
side
we're
to
setting
this.
up now.
There's another angle to this that we're overlooking, or at least have not articulated yet. In many sectors, AppSec is the cost of doing business because it's compliance. Anyone that's in a regulated industry or have regulated customers have to have this in order to survive audits on what they are doing in order to have a viable business within those particular markets. So I guess my question is, what's the percentage of customers that are not in regulated industries that don't need these tools in order to enter the markets?
So now that's an interesting twist though. So we already did talk about like a lot of these customers do it because they have to, because they're regulated to do so. But the reality is a ton of customers are still interested in AppSec, even though they're not explicitly regulated to do so. It is the cost of businesses. You know, it's just dumb not to. Like, of course, run some of these scans and at least, you know, do your OAuth top 10, whether you're regulated or not. Like, you just need to.
Security, the compliance is becoming a bigger part of the security discussion. And, you know, I think, so security was a big discussion in the force management workshop that we did. So we had lots of people weigh in with lots of different opinions. And one of the key takeaways there was McBride actually summarized security and managing risk as you need to secure your application test. You need to do application security testing. You need to secure your software development life cycle. You need to use a secure, you know, a secure tool like GitLab. But, and he's right, because we are, I don't know about you, Philippe, but increasingly I get pulled into these customer conversations that are a mixture of application security testing and compliance capabilities. And a lot of them are things like multi-factor authentication and things like that that have nothing to do with the secure stage itself. But everyone, I think, is starting to feel a sense of some level of compliance, even if they're not in a regulated industry.
And so that's also really interesting, because if I were to, again, starting that company today and I wanted to, you know, sort of not invest a ton in a security team, if you could give me the like, oh, click here in your SOC 2 compliance and client and your, you know, you can make your SaaS compliant and we'll help you make, like, that would be incredibly valuable, of which, you know, AST might be a portion of it, but the rest is all a factor. And I would love to think that GitLab as a whole should be helping you, you know, be compliant, but also just be best practices and whatever, even if it's not about minimal compliance. I'm not sure that, you know, the AST portion is, and I'm not sure what part of then secure goes beyond that. But as a DevOps platform, we should absolutely help you be compliant. And there's lots of factors in there. In the interest of time, though, we've only got a few more minutes left. I would love to just make sure we do a little bit we've already been doing the divergent thinking, but let's explicitly sort of shift gears and talk about, like, what are some of the big parts that we need to cover. We already know all the categories that we've listed, but, you know, one of the topics then could be, and I see people typing notes in the chat. You might want to put your, like, links and whatnot in the doc, so we actually have it stored after this call. But like, do we need a bug bounty program? Do we need all these things? For AST, we don't. I think it's totally fine to keep that out of scope. It's a really interesting idea. But putting AST like in the editor, that sounds pretty awesome. You know, like as I type a line of code and I add a dependency into my gem file, it instantly goes and be like, oh, you don't want that one. Make sure your version is this, that kind of thing. We had talked about auto remediation a little while ago. One of the things I want to know is auto remediation only for like dependency stuff? Like right now, that's the scope of it. Like you have a bad dependency or a dependency that, you know, gets patched and you auto remediate that. But like, is auto remediation of a SAST vulnerability? Is that even a thing? Can we make it a thing?
It's a thing that some of our competitors already do. And I think that we should be leveraging what we learn as we go forward and more people use our tools to also do that where possible. Because I feel that if we're going, I want to go into the education realm, because if we're not educating our customers on best practices, they're not going to do them. So if we're educating them, we can also help them make sure they're doing them.
That's awesome. I'd love to see something written about that than a bigger vision for auto remediation, because I think auto remediation is one of those things that Sid talks to about investors. It's sort of the story that resonates really easily for how our single application across all of DevOps can be done because we own it end to end. And seeing that applied to not just dependency scanning would probably be pretty damn powerful.
We
especially then. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, we can also, because we are the entire cycle, talk between the layers. So if we recognize there's a vulnerability in the container, that may be something that we stop at in the defend stage, at the web application firewall stage. So there's kind of a nice advantage of sitting there that we can, even if they don't fix their software, we can stop that attack.
And actually, if you think about like different regulations like PCI, where you have to say, I have a compensating control or a mitigating factor, we could automatically say, we're going to dismiss this vulnerability with this compensating control and keep it on record for you to pull up.
Yeah, that's like that. I had suggested, I opened an issue somewhere for RSA Archer because they want to work with us to do that. They can take a vulnerability and give it a risk profile based on compensating controls that they see elsewhere in the security program. And that might be a way to bring in that variable.
Cool. So going a different direction.
The auto remediation between all the stages, secure and defend, is kind of the killer feature, if you will, for where we ultimately want to get to. Because I do think we should do it and go much further than just dependency scanning for SAST as well as the defend capabilities. Because if we see things that are happening, you know, that's a unique piece of value we'll be able to deliver to our customers that's going to be hard to beat in the marketplace otherwise.
So likewise, you know, Nicole, you had talked about the whole, you know, whatever, decreasing false negatives and whatnot, or just weighing things using our broader, you know, hundreds of thousands of organizations. You know, we've always talked about the simplistic version of this, of like, most people just dismiss this warning. So, you know, take that as with a grain of salt, but like, you know, you might not necessarily care about this one either. You might be the one person that is in fact affected by this, but maybe you don't. But the other, like when Heartbleed comes out and like, no, everybody is panicked about this, take this seriously, like that's a piece of information that we can leverage. And then, you know, and then if we can just tell you how to fix it, that's awesome. But at least if we can tell you to care about it, like that's really awesome too. So I'd love to see that fleshed out a little bit.
In the case of where Heartbleed is, we could say everyone's panicking about this and there isn't a patch yet. We suggest remediation via mitigation until we alert you, and we will alert you as soon as there is a patch.
So there's a weird this is a totally divergent thinking thing here, but I worked at Heroku when Heartbleed happened, and we knew before the public knew, and we patched our infrastructure. And by the time the emails all went out, the emails were this thing's huge and you're already patched and running, which was a really awesome way to handle this stuff, as opposed to, hey, this thing just got announced and we're running the MR right now to see if we can fix it or whatever it is. It's like, no, you're already fixed. You just don't even need to worry. We don't own infrastructure that way or whatever, but boy, I'd love that story, and I wish somehow we could offer something like that. I think we'd have to have managed, clusters and everything else to be able to do so. So it's really, really far-fetched.
I could ask a question along those lines to take us in a completely different space.
Yeah.
So a lot of the talk about current state is around features and product. However, future state, the language has been around platform. So my question is this a distinction with a difference? And if there is a difference, what are we lacking to get there if that is the direction we're trying to go?
Well, it depends on what you mean by platform, because we have now sort of defined, we are a DevOps platform, but I think there's a difference between a managed platform and a platform that you can manage and provide to your clients. We are absolutely a platform. We've just rebranded as such, but are we a managed platform?
Well, from my notes from this conversation, there were a few phrases that kept coming up again and again, and that's what's led to this question. One, shift further left. 2, enable all stages with secure features. 3, in another stage, but. Or 4, educate, which led me to, is secure not a feature or a product, but is it a platform upon which other stages are built? That was the foundational thought that led to these questions.
The way I've been thinking of it, but I don't know how to articulate it, is we're kind of like the icing on top of a lot of the stages. We kind of get in there and hopefully help out, make it tastier.
Yeah, but that's no way that it was articulated earlier. That's why it seemed to be flipped from that.
Yeah, it's interesting because I have a hard time thinking of Secure as the platform on which we build the rest, as opposed to it's something that permeates the rest. I don't know if it makes a material difference for this, but the net of it is, I think that yes, Secure team or stage has for a long time aimed to have security thinking, if nothing else, and features permeate the rest of the DevOps lifecycle. It's one of the reasons that it's drawn below the loop instead of in a certain stage in the loop. And then there's a lot of ambiguity then about, well, who actually runs it? Just like we've got, the package registry will also have some security features. Which team actually works on that? Totally ambiguous, gray area. But the fact that we're having that conversation is awesome. And the fact that we definitely need to be having that conversation across every stage. That every stage, well, maybe not every, I don't know, but we should be thinking about it. We should be thinking about how do we get security into the planning stage. I don't know what the hell that means, but yes, we should have that in the planning stage. Definitely should have it at the create stage. I want to be able to have it in the IDE and show me my security vulnerabilities right there. Obviously, I want it in CI/CD stages. But again, for the purposes of this conversation, we're talking about specifically application security testing, not all of secure. Although it's a blurry spot. We started off this whole thing by saying, no, AST equals secure. But the reality is if we define secure as being more than AST, then that's just not true anymore, which is okay. But again, what I really want to see as the output of this is how in 3 years do we make that list of companies irrelevant because we are product leaders, or at least irrelevant for our other customers so that we displace those customers. That's my goal here.
One of the
anyway,
things
we are a little bit over time.
One of the things that the other ones are working towards is figuring out how to shift left. So they're knocking on our door to interface with us to be more relevant. We need to think about competitive and defensive mechanisms as well. Just throwing that out. I'm not going to resolve it here, but
yeah, true. I'll just say one more thing. I've mentioned this to Kenny before, but I think it's worth iterating to a slightly wider audience. There's a lot of questions about sort of our ambition level and where do we aim and how much do we partner, et cetera. And I totally get that there are times when companies or customers are going to need some point solution that we don't offer, and we can show the results of those scans in the same interface and provide them that same dashboard kind of view or the merge request view. I think that's absolutely essential, and we do play well with others, and we're always open to people adding in their capabilities. What I want to be really cautious about, though, is making that a primary focus of our strategy. That our primary focus needs to be that we have unbounded ambition and that we will make application security testing that is competitive with every vendor out there. And our goal is to make our SaaS, DAST, IST, everything else be great so that you don't need to use any of these things. But if for whatever reason, even just as simple as, well, it takes time to migrate away, that's one of the reasons we have, Jenkins. I believe absolutely truly that our product is better than Jenkins, but there are times when it just takes months, if not years, to transition away from Jenkins. And so we have to have a good Jenkins integration so that you can, get a company to adopt, especially if it's like, well, 30% of our org is ready to adopt GitLab CI, but the rest is still on Jenkins. Give them time. We need to be able to support Jenkins. But our primary goal is to make Jenkins irrelevant. And I want to just hammer that home, that when we talk about all these things, don't get bogged down by, yeah, but our open source thing is limited, so therefore we got to make a primary thing to be, let's partner to make feature X better. Our primary thing should be, how do we make feature X better ourselves? And I'd love to see us, I just want to see us always talking about that and keeping that front and center. And then with that acknowledgement, if it's, oh, okay, but then we also need to make these APIs and we need to show this other stuff because that helps us sell, then great. But a huge failure mode would be, we have a wonderful dashboard and all the content comes from other scanners and we don't make any money off of that because it's hard to prove the value of the dashboard. And I really want to avoid that failure mode.
If we have though spent time building APIs and webhooks that are generic, and obviously I want to spend zero time actually writing integrations, that also means when a new open source tool comes out, we should be able to just grab that, hopefully. So I'm hoping any work that we do towards being able to use a partner would also mean we could also use a different OSS project if we ourselves wanted to switch that in the future. I'm hoping none of it is throwaway work and none of it is geared towards only partners, because that would be not a good spend, I think.
Right, and it turns out there's a lot of technical things that we've done that work out really well that way, where we've got a certain format we ingest, and part of our custom work is just to convert whatever is there to that format. And honestly, I'm okay with like publishing that format and maybe even making that an open source format, even if the consumption of it is in Ultimate and the consumption isn't open source. But being like, hey, here's this open source standard. In fact, I was talking with a large federal organization, and one of the huge things that they're worried about is this vendor lock-in thing. And I get that right now the industry is ripe with vendor lock-in, but if we can help move the industry away from that and make like, oh, here's this open source standard for how all scanners can report their things. And then of course we'll consume it and then we will, make use of it ourselves, but anybody can go make use of it. Like, that sounds wonderful. In fact, it's a brilliant strategic move, because then we sort of, we remove the barrier for anybody to switch. And that, if the whole world adopts this, maybe other people will start showing it, GitHub or whoever starts using it as well. But overall, it's still going to be easier for us because it makes it easier for people to switch.
But to your point, though, you said it would be a failure if all we had was a security dashboard and the data comes from other scanners. So if we make that open source and that sharing that data becomes super simple, then doesn't it come down to, actually, I would say two things. One is having the dashboard, but the other is having it all done at code commit.
Well, but then I would also say the part that's missing from that is that and then having offerings that are so good that people will choose ours over those other point solutions. And not just like, oh, ours is 80% as good, so I'll use it if I'm forced to, or I'll use it if it's free. But no, it's better. And that's where we're at with GitLab CI. I mean, we have customers come to us and they want to stay on GitHub, but they want our CI. And it's hard for other folks to sort of understand that. But our CI is, you know, best of breed, truly. It's not just 80% as good as, it's a better solution than what's out there. And there's no reason for us to not aim for that same level with AST. It should be better than all those competitors, so that people will, not just because it's deeply integrated, because it's just genuinely better all on its own. We have more data behind it. We have whatever. I don't even know how, in what ways it's going to be better, but we should aim for it to be a better product, so that, sure, technically any given customer could use point solutions for everything and just show it all in one dashboard, but you wouldn't choose to, because we have better solutions. At least, again, in a phased approach, like, okay, one or two of ours are better unequivocally, and the rest are, maybe not as good. So I'll use point solutions for them if I really have to. And then a whole bunch of other people will be like, well, I'm not even going to bother using those point solutions because these are good enough, et cetera, et cetera. But our ambition should not be to assume that we will actually make a worse product than these folks. Our ambition needs to be that we'll make a better product than these folks eventually. It might take time. It will take time. It might take more than 3 years. I don't know. But 3 years is a long time. Anyway, we are at time. Thank you, everybody. Feel free to follow up. We can do another iteration of these afterwards. I don't know if the PMs have enough content to make any changes to the doc. We never really talked about the specifics, but I would love to see a review of the changes, and then do this again.
It's a good discussion. Thanks.
Yeah, and there's a new, I guess, format for creating these vision documents that we're trying to land on. So Nicole and Sam, we can talk about that and propose an MR to update the current strategy vision in that format, and also incorporate this dialogue.
Cool. And then also just, at a meta level, feel free to give any feedback about this process itself. If it was helpful, not helpful. I feel like I should give a survey at the end, but I definitely would love feedback and see what we can improve for next time. All right. Thanks, everyone.
Cool. Thanks,
Ciao.
Mark.
Thanks all. Bye.
Bye.